Arthur Bishop was a man in his late 40s, his face etched with the lines of time and the scars of pain. He lived on the edge of a small, forgotten town near the Mexican border. His home was a simple wooden shack, neither fancy nor warm, just shelter. Just like his life. Every morning he had the same routine: coffee, a quiet walk, then a trip to the garage outside town to fix old cars, not for the money, but to keep his hands busy, to quiet his mind. But his mind never stopped. Day after day, night after night, the same scene flashed before his eyes. His little daughter running, laughing, along the riverbank, a moment of inattention as Arthur tried to catch her. His foot slipped, and the powerful current engulfed him. Screams, the roar, a desperate father. He had never forgotten that day. His wife couldn't forgive this loss. She blamed Arthur and left him. "You're a hero in the army, but you couldn't protect your own daughter." The words still rang in her ears. Arthur, overcome with grief, tried to return to the army, but every mission, every gunshot, brought back his daughter's strangled screams. Finally, he shed his uniform and abandoned his duty. Now he was simply a lost, broken man. The townspeople hardly recognized him. "That old soldier," they called him, avoiding eye contact. For there was something indescribable in Arthur's eyes: anger, sorrow, and emptiness. It was a look that disturbed people. One evening, Arthur was dismantling the engine of an old Jeep in the garage. As the sun set, the interior grew dark. Footsteps were heard outside. Reflexively, Arthur grabbed a heavy wrench. When the door opened, a tall, sharp-eyed woman entered. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore a military-style jacket. "Hello, Arthur," she said, her voice both cold and familiar. Arthur narrowed his eyes, recognizing her immediately. "Natasha?" he said, his voice low but with surprise. She was one of his old teammates he hadn't seen in years. They had fought together in Afghanistan. They had saved each other's lives countless times. Arthur put his tool down. "What are you doing here?" "The army told me years ago they no longer needed me." Natasha walked in with heavy steps. "It's not the army this time. I need you." Arthur shook his head. "You've come to the wrong person. I'm not fighting anymore." Natasha approached him, looking into his eyes. "Arthur, a diplomat's daughter has been kidnapped on the Mexican border. The cartel has her. An official operation is impossible. The army and the government have withdrawn their support because the cartel controls this place with an iron fist. Her chances of survival are limited to days. And you are the only one who can do it." Arthur's face tightened. The diplomat's daughter, child. The very word wrenched his heart, but at the same moment, his mind flashed to the face of his little girl lost in the river. The thought stabbed him like a knife. "I'm no longer someone to be saved, Natasha," Arthur said harshly. "Don't offer me heroism." "That man is dead." Natasha's eyes softened. "No, Arthur. That man is still there, just drowning in pain. But this girl, if we lose her, it will be as if you've lost your own daughter a second time. This is your chance. Maybe it's the only way you can forgive yourself." Arthur was silent for a moment. The silence echoed with the howling of the wind outside, the pounding of his own heart inside. Then he glanced at an old photograph hanging on the wall. His little girl, her arms around his neck, laughing. That smile was gone. He took a deep breath. He looked at Natasha. "How much time do I have?" A gleam appeared in Natasha's eyes. 24 hours until I leave." The night after Natasha's visit was sleepless. Arthur sat alone at his worn wooden table, an empty whiskey bottle beside him, staring at the single photograph he kept of his daughter. Her smile seemed to mock him, reminding him of the man he once was: a father, a soldier, a protector. Now he was none of those things. But Natasha's words wouldn't leave his mind. If you don't save her, it'll be like losing your daughter a second time. By dawn, Arthur was already awake, pacing the floor. His instincts told him to walk away. He had buried the warrior inside years ago, but the ghost of his daughter whispered otherwise. When Natasha returned, he was ready. His duffel bag lay open on the table, a combat knife, a pair of pistols, spare magazines, and a rusted dog tag, the tools of a man he swore he'd never be again. "You're serious," Natasha said, raising an eyebrow. Arthur didn't look up. "I wouldn't have packed if I wasn't." The two left the quiet border town in Natasha's black SUV. The road stretched endlessly into the desert, dust clouds rising behind them. For the first time in years, Arthur felt the weight of a mission settling onto his shoulders again. On the way, Natasha filled him in. The kidnapped girl was Isabella Ramirez, 17, daughter of a U.S. diplomat stationed in Mexico City. She had been taken by the cartel led by Victor Delgado, a ruthless kingpin whose grip extended across the border. Delgado wasn't just a criminal. He was a warlord, a man who bought politicians and executed entire families to send a message. "They'll use her to send a statement," Natasha said grimly. "And when they're done, they'll dispose of her body like trash." Arthur's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Not if we get there first." They drove for hours until they reached a safe house near the border. It was nothing more than an abandoned warehouse, but inside Natasha had stocked it with crates of weapons, ammunition, and tactical gear. Arthur ran his hands over the weapons like a pianist reacquainting himself with forgotten keys. "You've been busy," he muttered. "I always prepare for the worst," Natasha replied. Arthur loaded a rifle, checking the scope. The movements were automatic, as natural as breathing. Natasha watched him carefully. "You haven't lost your touch," she said. Arthur gave a bitter smile. "That's what scares me." That night, Arthur dreamt of the river again, the icy water pulling his daughter away, his screams echoing through the valley. He woke drenched in sweat, his hands trembling. Natasha, sitting nearby with a map spread across the table, looked up. "Delgado's compound is here," she said, pointing to a spot deep within the cartel's territory. Surrounded by armed guards, surveillance everywhere. Going in isn't just dangerous. It's suicide. Arthur rubbed his face. "Then we don't go in through the front." He traced the map with his finger, spotting a drainage canal that ran under the compound wall. "They'll expect an attack from the outside, not from beneath. That's our way in." Natasha studied him for a moment. This was the Arthur Bishop she remembered, the strategist, the leader, the man who could turn impossible into possible. "All right," she said finally, "then we move at dawn." As Arthur sat back, his eyes drifted to the photo Natasha had laid beside the map. Isabella Ramirez, smiling with her father at a public event. For a split second, he saw his daughter's face instead, his jaw clenched. He whispered to himself so softly Natasha almost didn't hear, "I won't lose her too." The desert night was eerily quiet as Arthur and Natasha moved through the shadows, keeping low to the ground. The drainage canal Arthur had identified stretched before them, a rusted grate barely visible beneath the moonlight. The air smelled of dust, oil, and something else. Fear. Arthur crouched by the grate, pulling out a crowbar from his pack. With a grunt, he pried it loose. The sound of screeching metal cut through the silence. Natasha flinched, glancing over her shoulder. "Hurry," she whispered. Arthur shoved the grate aside and motioned for her to go first. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, thick with the stench of stagnant water. The tunnel was narrow, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. Every drip of water echoed. Every scrape of their boots against the concrete seemed louder than it should. Arthur's mind flashed with images of his daughter in the river, dark water swallowing her whole. He clenched his teeth and pushed forward. After nearly an hour of crawling, they reached a rusted ladder that led upward. Arthur pressed his ear to the hatch above. Faint voices, laughter, the clinking of bottles. Guards. He held up 3 fingers signaling Natasha. 3 men. In a single motion, Arthur pushed the hatch open. The element of surprise was their ally. He climbed out swiftly. Silenced pistol raised. The first guard dropped before he even turned. Natasha followed, her blade slicing across the second guard's throat in one fluid movement. The third raised his weapon, but Arthur's shot cut him down instantly. The room was silent again except for the pounding of Arthur's heart. He glanced at Natasha. She nodded. "We're in." They moved deeper into the compound, every step calculated, every shadow a potential enemy. The deeper they went, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a cartel base. It was a fortress. High walls reinforced with steel, floodlights sweeping across the yard, guards patrolling with assault rifles. Delgado wasn't taking any chances. Arthur and Natasha slipped into an abandoned storage shed to regroup. Natasha unfolded a small map she had memorized. "According to intel, Isabella is being held in the east wing of the compound," she whispered. "But that place is crawling with guards." Arthur adjusted the strap of his rifle. His jaw tightened. "Then we'll carve a path." Before Natasha could respond, voices echoed outside. Heavy boots. A patrol. Arthur motioned for silence. Through a crack in the wooden wall, he spotted them. 5 men, laughing, smoking, rifles slung across their shoulders. Arthur waited until they were close, then burst through the door like a shadow unleashed. His knife drove into the first guard's chest before the man could scream. Natasha's pistol cracked twice, dropping 2 more. The last 2 scrambled to raise their rifles, but Arthur spun low, disarming one with a brutal strike to the wrist before snapping his neck. Natasha finished the other with a clean headshot. The bodies collapsed in the dirt. Silence fell again. Arthur's breathing was heavy, his knuckles bloodied. Natasha placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're different," she said softly. Arthur's eyes burned with an old fury. "I told you, that man never died. He was just waiting." They dragged the bodies into the shadows and pressed forward. As they neared the east wing, the atmosphere grew heavier. Music blasted from inside. A party. Delgado's men were drinking, laughing, unaware of the storm that was creeping through their walls. Arthur peered through a narrow window. His heart clenched. Isabella was there, tied to a chair in the center of the room. Her face was bruised, her eyes red from crying. Around her, a group of guards jeered, making bets on how long she'd last before Delgado himself arrived. Arthur's grip on his rifle tightened until his knuckles turned white. He turned to Natasha. "They're using her as bait," he growled. Natasha nodded grimly. "They want us to come to them." Arthur's eyes hardened. "Then let's not disappoint them." He chambered around, his face a mask of resolve. For the first time since his daughter's death, Arthur Bishop felt alive. The muffled bass of music vibrated through the walls as Arthur and Natasha crouched outside the east wing. Inside, laughter echoed, cruel and mocking, circling around the terrified cries of Isabella Ramirez. Arthur's jaw clenched so tight it ached. He saw not Isabella in that chair, but his own daughter, trapped, afraid, powerless. His pulse thundered. Natasha whispered, "We'll have one shot at this. The moment we breach, they'll flood the room with reinforcements." Arthur checked his rifle one last time, the metallic click of the bolt echoing in the silence. "Then we make that one shot count." They stacked against the steel door. Arthur counted down with his fingers, 3, 2, 1. He kicked it open with a violent crash, the music blaring louder for an instant before gunfire drowned it out. Arthur's first burst cut down 2 men instantly. Natasha's pistol spat fire as she pivoted left, dropping another guard who tried to raise his AK. Shouts erupted, bottles smashed, chairs toppled as chaos devoured the room. "Get the girl!" Arthur barked. He dove forward, his body moving with an instinct he thought he'd lost years ago. One guard lunged at him with a knife. Arthur caught his wrist, twisted hard, then smashed the man's skull into the table. The wood splintered. The guard didn't move again. Two more turned their rifles toward Isabella, using her as a human shield. Arthur froze, heart in his throat. For a second, his daughter's face flashed before his eyes. No, not again. With surgical precision, Arthur fired. One bullet tore through the first guard's shoulder, spinning him away from the girl. Natasha's shot followed instantly, drilling the second between the eyes. Isabella screamed, eyes wide in shock. But she was alive. Arthur reached her in 3 strides, cutting the ropes binding her wrists. "We're here to take you home," he said, his voice low but steady. Isabella clung to him, trembling. "They said they'd kill me." "Not while I'm breathing," Arthur growled. Gunfire erupted from the hallway. Reinforcements. The music had stopped. The party was over. Delgado's fortress was waking up. Natasha shoved a rifle into Isabella's hands. "Can you shoot?" Isabella's hands shook violently. I don't know." "Then stay low and don't hesitate," Natasha ordered. The door burst open as half a dozen cartel soldiers stormed in. Arthur spun, firing in controlled bursts. One dropped, then another. Natasha moved like lightning. Her shots precise, clinical. Still more poured in. "Too many," Natasha shouted. Arthur grabbed Isabella by the arm, pulling her toward an overturned table. Bullets tore through the wood, splinters raining down like shrapnel. He leaned out, firing until his magazine ran dry, then slammed in another with muscle memory born of years in uniform. Suddenly the air shook with a thunderous roar. A grenade rolled into the room, clinking across the floor. Arthur's instincts took over. He hurled Isabella to the ground, throwing himself over her just as the explosion ripped through the chamber. The world became fire and smoke, his ears ringing violently. Shards of metal and wood tore into his back, his vision blurred, but his body shielded Isabella completely. Natasha dragged them both behind cover. "Arthur, you good?" He coughed, blood in his mouth. Still breathing. His eyes burned with fury. Delgado wanted bait? He's about to choke on the hook. Through the haze, a new figure emerged at the far end of the room. Tall, immaculate suit, a predator's smile. Victor Delgado himself. He clapped slowly, the sound chilling against the chaos. "Arthur Bishop," he said in accented English, "I've heard stories. The ghost who vanished after tragedy, and now here you are, back from the dead." Arthur stood, bloodied, rifle raised. "You're about to wish I stayed that way." Delgado snapped his fingers. Dozens of armed men swarmed into the halls. The floor trembled under their boots. Isabella whimpered, clutching Arthur's arm. Natasha whispered fiercely, "We're surrounded." Arthur's eyes never left Delgado. His voice was calm, deadly. "Good. Saves us the trouble of hunting them down." He pulled Isabella closer, then checked his rifle one last time. His body ached, his vision swam, but his spirit burned with a fire he hadn't felt since before the river. Before his daughter, this was no longer just a mission. This was redemption. Arthur Bishop was back in the fight. The room shook with the thunder of boots and the rattling of assault rifles as Delgado's soldiers flooded the east wing. Smoke still hung in the air from the grenade, making every shadow seem alive. Arthur stood at the center, blood streaking his face, his rifle gripped like an extension of his will. Natasha crouched beside him, her eyes sharp, her pistol steady. Isabella trembled between them, clutching the weapon Natasha had given her, though she could barely keep it from shaking. Delgado's smirk widened as he stepped closer. "You've walked into my house, Bishop. You should have stayed buried with your ghosts." Arthur raised his rifle, voice low, dangerous. I buried my ghosts a long time ago. Now it's your turn. With a snap of Delgado's fingers, the soldiers opened fire. Bullets tore through the air, shredding walls, exploding bottles, sending sparks raining down. Arthur yanked Isabella behind cover, then swung his rifle out, unleashing a storm of precise bursts. 3 men went down before they even knew where he was. Natasha rolled across the floor, firing in rapid succession, dropping 2 more with clean headshots. But for every body that hit the ground, 2 more poured in. The compound roared with the sound of war. Arthur's instincts, honed from years of combat, surged to the surface. He moved like he was back in uniform, back in the deserts and jungles of forgotten wars. He ducked behind cover, popped out, fired 2 shots, always 2, never wasting ammo, never hesitating. Each squeeze of the trigger was cold, efficient, deadly. "Move!" Natasha shouted. She kicked over a burning table, creating a wall of fire between them and the advancing guards. Smoke filled the air. Coughing, Isabella clung to Arthur as he guided her toward the far hallway. But the enemy was everywhere. A squad rounded the corner, rifles blazing. Arthur tackled Isabella to the floor, firing from his knees. Bullets punched into bodies, blood spraying across the walls. Natasha darted forward, her blade flashing in the smoke, silent and merciless. Still they came. Arthur slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. "We can't hold this position." Natasha wiped blood from her cheek. Then we cut through them. They burst into the hallway, the narrow corridor amplifying every shot, every scream. The walls shook, plaster crumbling. Arthur took point, his rifle spitting fire, while Natasha covered their flank with brutal precision. Isabella stumbled behind them, eyes wide in terror, forced to witness the nightmare unraveling around her. The deeper they went, the more resistance they met. Cartel soldiers with heavy armor, shotguns, even mounted machine guns tearing through the walls. Arthur dove into a side room, dragging Isabella with him, as a barrage of bullets shredded the doorway. "We're pinned!" Natasha shouted, ducking behind a pillar. Arthur's gaze darted to a stack of propane canisters in the corner. Without a word, he grabbed a grenade from his vest, yanked the pin, and lobbed it. The explosion was hell unleashed. Fire roared down the hallway, consuming soldiers in its path. Screams filled the air, cut short by the roar of collapsing walls. Dust and flame swallowed everything. When the smoke cleared, Delgado was gone, but his men kept coming. Arthur staggered to his feet, ears ringing, blood running down his arm. He looked at Natasha. "We end this. Tonight." Natasha nodded, grim determination in her eyes. "Then we take the fight to him." Arthur turned to Isabella, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Stay close. No matter what happens, don't let go." The girl nodded, clutching his sleeve like a lifeline. Together, the 3 of them pushed deeper into the compound. The once celebratory halls of Delgado's fortress were now a war zone. Walls scorched black, corpses littering the ground, smoke and fire choking the air. Arthur felt the burn in his muscles, the sting of his wounds, but he also felt something he hadn't in years: clarity, purpose. The soldier inside him wasn't dead. He had simply been waiting. And now, as the storm raged, Arthur Bishop was awake. Somewhere ahead, Delgado was waiting, and Arthur knew there would be no turning back. The compound's inner sanctum loomed ahead, a sprawling chamber lined with marble pillars, chandeliers shattered by stray gunfire, and a grand staircase rising into shadows above. The air reeked of gunpowder, smoke, and blood. It was the heart of Delgado's empire. Arthur, Natasha, and Isabella burst through the ruined double doors, weapons raised. The silence inside was unnerving. No guards rushing, no chaos, only the eerie flicker of firelight crawling across gilded walls. Then a voice cut through the silence. Deep, smooth, venomous. "You should have walked away, Bishop." Victor Delgado stepped into the light at the top of the staircase, his pristine suit now flecked with ash, his pistol gleaming in his hand. Behind him, half a dozen elite guards emerged from the shadows, rifles trained on Arthur and Natasha. Arthur tightened his grip on his rifle, shielding Isabella behind him. "This ends tonight, Delgado, one way or another." Delgado smirked. "I admire the courage, misplaced, but admirable. Tell me, do you think this girl will thank you when your blood paints these floors?" Isabella whimpered, clutching Arthur's sleeve. He glanced at her. Her fear was a knife in his chest. His daughter's face flashed in her place, pulling him back to that riverbank, to the icy water swallowing everything he loved. His jaw set like stone. Not again. Never again. Arthur's voice cut through the chamber. "You'll never touch her. You'll never touch anyone again." The room erupted. Gunfire shattered the silence, a storm of bullets ripping through pillars, sparks flying from marble as the firefight exploded into chaos. Arthur dove behind cover, returning fire with brutal precision. Natasha spun to his flank, laying down suppressive bursts that tore through Delgado's guards. One by one, the elite soldiers fell, but not without a price. Natasha grunted as a bullet grazed her arm, blood soaking her sleeve. Arthur's ribs burned with every breath, shrapnel from earlier still lodged deep. But they pushed forward, relentless. Delgado descended the stairs slowly, calmly, firing between his men with calculated precision. Every shot was meant to kill, meant to remind Arthur that this was no ordinary cartel lord. This was a predator. Arthur growled, shoving Isabella behind a pillar. "Stay down. Don't move until I tell you." He surged forward, rolling across the marble as bullets chewed the floor. He came up firing, dropping one guard with a headshot, another with a burst to the chest. Natasha's shots clipped a third, sending him sprawling down the stairs. Soon, only Delgado remained. The cartel lord smiled coldly, holstering his pistol. He reached into his coat and drew a gleaming combat knife, its blade catching the firelight. "No more guns," Delgado said, voice dripping with arrogance. "You want to finish this? Let's finish it as men." Arthur's rifle clicked empty. He dropped it without hesitation. His hand went to his belt, drawing his own combat knife, a weapon he hadn't unsheathed in years, but one that felt all too familiar in his grip. The two men circled each other in the ruined chamber, eyes locked, predators sizing each other up. Natasha raised her pistol, but Arthur shook his head once. "He's mine." Delgado lunged first, his blade slashing in a brutal arc. Arthur blocked, steel clashing against steel, sparks flying. Pain seared through his side as Delgado's follow-up cut grazed his ribs. He grunted, shoving the drug lord back with raw strength. They traded blows in a storm of steel, each strike echoing through the chamber like thunder. Delgado was fast, vicious, his knife dancing with deadly precision, but Arthur was relentless, his rage fueling every movement, every counter, every strike. Delgado sneered as their blades locked. "You fight like a man who's already lost everything." Arthur's eyes burned with fury. "That's why you'll never win. I've got nothing left to lose." With a roar, he slammed his shoulder into Delgado, driving him back into a pillar. The cartel lord slashed wildly, but Arthur twisted, disarming him with a brutal wrist lock. The knife clattered to the ground. Arthur pressed his blade against Delgado's throat. The room was silent except for Delgado's ragged breath. "You should have stayed in the shadows, Bishop," Delgado rasped. Arthur's voice was ice. "And you should have never touched the innocent." He drove the knife home. Delgado gasped, eyes wide, before collapsing to the marble floor, lifeless. The empire he built crumbled with him. Arthur staggered back, chest heaving, blood dripping from his wounds. Natasha lowered her pistol, eyes fixed on him. "It's over." Arthur looked at Isabella, who trembled but alive, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, Arthur felt the crushing weight of his guilt lift. Just a little. He had saved her. He had done what he couldn't do for his own daughter. He reached out a hand. Isabella took it, gripping tight. Arthur Bishop was broken, scarred, haunted. But tonight he had won.